Hello everyone, this is update for April 27, 2024, day 794 of the war and of the date update. Also catch up for April 26 and 25. I'm gonna jump straight into the situation on the battlefield and do a walkthrough, and actually we'll discuss strategic problems that Ukrainian army is facing while discussing relevant section of the front line, specifically central Donbass front line, where things are really um, becoming very, very difficult for Ukraine. So, as I said, I'm going to start in a clockwise fashion, as I always do. And first is the situation along the state border. Um, I would say it remains more or less the same. There is definitely, as I all sort of rumors that the Russian army may attack towards Kharkiv and so on. Doesn't look like that Russian army has enough manpower to do that. So I think this is more sort of rumors rather than reality. At the same time, eventually this may become reality. As I mentioned before, there is organizational structure that Russian military created. So far, it's called, uh, I would call it Army Group North. So it has this letter N. So technically, organizational structure has been created. And the only question is to put resources in that organizational structure. I don't believe that Russian army has enough resources because it's really requiring at the minimum 300,000 up to 500,000 people, and it's just not there yet for Russia. Now let's move to the situation along the on the North Lugansk front line. Things a little bit got sort of a little bit more active. There are reports of Russian attacks towards Kislivka. They gained some ground. At the same time, the the reports are overblown that there is some kind of breakthrough Ukrainian defenses, and so that's not really true. It's just primitive squeeze, and uh, Russian troops did push Ukrainian troops. I don't know, 300, 400 meters in that village, but it's not a true breakthrough as it's being reported by various Russian propaganda outlets. Situation there is, I would say, relatively under control, especially relative to the situation on the central Donbass front line, which I will discuss as we get there. Now let's move to the North Donbass section of the front line. The northern sector remains fairly quiet, nothing to report there. The southern is actually remains more or less sort of stuck in the same pattern, and the problem for the Russian troops that it's actually not so straightforward to capture Chasiv Yar, which is the immediate target, because the only, or I would say, most efficient way to do that is by basically creating semi-encirclement and pushing Ukrainian troops out of that semi-encirclement. To do that, there's quite a bit of ground remains, especially on the northern flank. As you can see, Russian troops are not really even approached this freshwater channel. They did reach it south of Chasiv Yar, but still they need to build these pincers. And then the next step, which is going to be also not straightforward, is to cross freshwater channel, which by itself is a challenging task, and then advance to the north and south of Chasiv Yar. So that this whole situation remains really uh, far away for now for Russia. And the other point is that Russian troops really need to clear up this effectively Ukrainian bridgehead on the eastern side of this freshwater channel. So, and that's also not done. So, it's the whole story about capturing Chasiv Yar is little bit far away. It's not coming close, but soon. But obviously, eventually, if things go the way they are, this is something that eventually will happen. Now let's move to the situation on the central Donbass front line, where things are really, I would say, got out of control for Ukrainian side, where I mentioned before there was a breakthrough of Russian troops towards Ocheretyne. This is initial sort of after that initial breakthrough. I mentioned about that in the past video, but I didn't have detailed map, and it was kind of not very, probably not very helpful for the viewers to understand what really happened. So actually, I'm gonna go back a little bit and go back to the strategy of Russian command, which improved, I mentioned before, where they started actually a little bit, they advancing more towards, call it modern warfare from the peasant army. And the first step was that the Russian command started concentrating resources, concentrating armor, concentrating soldiers, basically all of the resources in attack. So, and that yielded some results that we have seen so far. The second improvement that happened in Russian command is that they started probe Ukrainian defenses, and if they're not lucky, they switch. They look for other section of the front line where they could be lucky, where they can get lucky, where they can break through, and that's another significant improvement in Russian command. So at this point, the gap between Ukrainian command and Russian command is becoming really significant, and the situation becoming very challenging for Ukrainian side, given that Russia has numerical advantage in terms of equipment and everything else. Even though nominally they have fewer soldiers on the ground, but the rest of it, technical side, is definitely on the Russians. Russia has advantage over Ukraine. Now there is also significant advantage in the skills of the Russian of the senior command on the Russian side. So that really creates, I would say, insurmountable problem for Ukrainian troops, and we see that on the battlefield where Ukrainian defenses are falling apart. So first, as I stated before, Russian troops were attacking for a while this towards Berdychi and then south of it, but they got stopped, and so along this front line they got stuck for a while. So they changed the strategy. They started looking for the weak spots in Ukrainian defenses, and they found this weak spot here where there was 115th Brigade. So they breached through that, and they managed to advance all the way. As you can see, this kind of like narrow peninsula, and they managed to capture a significant portion of this village Ocheretyne as a result. And then they started sort of advancing from there. Basically, they finished capturing Ocheretyne towards north, then they advanced south, they captured Novokalynove, then they advanced there west, they captured village Solovyove. So this kind of created, they covered sort of their own flanks. As a result of that, this kind of created really difficult situation for Ukrainian troops in Berdychi, in the remaining part of Berdychi. So Ukrainian troops had to kind of withdraw from Berdychi, and so this is kind of how Russian troops captured this, because before they were stuck essentially with this. So this is kind of like roundabout way. Russian troops managed to capture Berdychi and force withdrawal of Ukrainian troops towards west. Then also Russian troops managed to break through Ukrainian defenses in Semenivka. So as you can see, this whole section of the front line fell apart, not because of the weak defenses here in this Berdychi Semenivka area, but because Russian troops managed to break through north of it. And so as you can see, this whole situation, the situation is still sort of in development, dynamic, but it's very clear that Ukrainian defenses in this area collapsed. Then, related to this, Russian troops managed to attack north and capture village Novokalynove. From there, they captured village Keramik, and now they are sort of in process of attacking towards Arkhangelsk, this village. And it doesn't look like the Ukrainian troops will hold there for much longer either. So this whole area essentially collapsed. First, initially by this very narrow advance that could have been cut off. This Russian troops could have been cut off should Ukrainian command and then troops able to do active defense. But that's not. This is not a sort of feature of Ukrainian army. And so this then led to pretty bad outcome for Ukrainian forces. There are sort of two sides of it. One side is there's very clear sign of loss of motivation among Ukrainian troops, among Ukrainian people on the ground, soldiers on the ground, where they if they experience strong pressure from the Russian side, they choose to retreat at this point. They're not holding ground as it used to be. And this is, as I mentioned before, a result of loss of motivation, where Ukrainian army is getting replacement that's where people are not terribly motivated. And that's, as I mentioned before, also tied to general political situation, rampant corruption, where people essentially don't see a point to defend the corrupt system. And that's in very primitive, simplified way how I would explain this whole new developments in Ukrainian army. Also, corroborating that is the fact that you probably will see quite a bit of abandoned Western equipment that was captured by Russian army. Some of it is in pretty good condition, which is again a sign that that Ukrainian soldiers are not motivated and basically abandoning equipment at the slightest threat to their life. And that's another reason why simply providing more equipment is not going to solve the problem. It's not so mechanistic as it's sort of looks or as many people would like it to be, but it's not mechanistic situation. It's people. It's about people, because really the weapon is people, and the equipment is just a tool for people to do the job. And if people don't want to do the job, the tool, whatever tool you give, it's going to be useless. And probably there's going to be more and more of that, and it's going to become much more visible. Now, in terms of Russia's situation, so they did break through. They captured this significant amount of territory. This actually, while it's definitely a success for Russian side, this also self-limiting situation, because to continue breakthrough and develop into something bigger, Russian side needs more troops, which they don't have. And so this effectively sort of kind of like saving this whole situation from really like significant collapse on Ukrainian side, because even though Russian side had initial success, it's unable to turn it into complete collapse of Ukrainian front line, simply because it doesn't have enough soldiers. And the limiting factor for Russian side is really soldiers. Mentioned before, Russia has roughly 600 soldiers on the ground in Ukraine, and it's just simply not enough for this extremely long front line, which roughly 1,000 kilometers long, maybe a little bit more, but plus minus, and it's definitely not enough. For that reason, there are some of the some members of Russian parliament already stating that there is need for new round of mobilization, which is because it's becoming obvious that if Russia wants to continue this war, they need to mobilize more troops, because of these successes they also they cost, right? They not free. There is significant losses of Russian troops, and so to continue this, you need more troops, and you need significant concentration of troops on a narrow in a narrow area. So in some ways, so to sum it up, um, Ukrainian forces are at this point not capable of holding the ground and have keep the front line despite all odds. They do retreat, and this is related to motivation. That's a real driver, and I would say also related to incompetence of Ukrainian top military command and obviously top political command. So this is kind of like a toxic brew that Ukraine has, and also there are significant changes in Russia's strategy. Russian military command strategy, which obviously makes it even worse for Ukrainian side. And then there's another part that's more technical, actual equipment, and the way Russian command is using equipment is that Russian command essentially using these gliding bombs, which are deadly to the rigid defense, which is what Ukrainian command is practicing. So this essentially creates problem, makes it really impossible to hold a steady, rigid defense for Ukrainian side. Now this is basically the same picture, but showing in the same area. Then there is some advances of Russian troops in Krasnohorivka, which is where Russians basically Russian troops are slowly going through Krasnohorivka. It's just a question of time before Ukrainian side is going to lose it. Now let's move to the Zaporizhya section of the front line. This section is fairly quiet, not much going on here. Now let's finish with the last section of the front line along the Dnipro River. And things here are also quiet. As I mentioned before, there is no point for Russian side to expand resources, and Ukrainian side also doesn't have resources. So it's kind of like a status quo. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye-bye.